Support me, Red Bull. It is 9:30. It is the third day of November. It is an extremely important evening. If you haven't voted yet, please vote for this guy. Because of the two awful choices, he's the less awful. So, we were going through the news yesterday, and we mentioned that Wizards of the Coast is releasing yet another version of 5th edition with the Young Adventurer's Guide to Adventuring in Dungeons & Dragons. Even though we know Tasha's is the gateway to what will eventually be 6th edition, it's the 48th year of D&D, so we can expect 6th edition within sometime in the next 2 years, because for the 50th anniversary, we're probably going to get 6th edition Dungeons & Dragons of something around there. So, yeah. So with the release of the Young Adventurer's Guide, that makes multiple versions of 5th edition available. So it's like, and everyone is slightly different, which is how the whole D&D version thing gets started. This version and this version and this version are each slightly different. Even though there are 5 editions, there are like 32 versions of the Dungeons & Dragons rule sets since day one in 1974. Because multiple publishers, multiple writers, and I'm just talking United States. I'm not talking, the European or Asian or Hispanic versions, because versions in different languages or versions that were tweaked for, I'm just talking D&D USA. Even though there's 5 editions, there's multiple versions. Especially when you switch from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. And this is not counting Pathfinder, which most people consider a unofficial evolution of what D&D couldn't be. So every time one of these versions or new publications or new box sets come out, you have your group of loyalists, whatever, people who like that version better than this version or this version, and will follow that version into its evolution. And when that version stops being published, they will eventually start hacking it, reprinting it, and that's how the OSR movement and the DIY D&D hack movement got started, especially thanks to the OGL. People like, Steve's version of Dungeons & Dragons, but they don't like Larry's version of Dungeons & Dragons, even though both came out about the same time. So let us take a look at best guess how many different versions of Dungeons & Dragons have been released in America since 1974. We're going to the D&D Editions Wikipedia webpage. This is 99% accurate, but I have a feeling it might have missed something, and I don't know if it counts 5th. So here we go. 1974, original Dungeons & Dragons by Gygax and Gangs. We have Man and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and the Underworld's Wilderness Guide. 1977, we have Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and the Monster Manual for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But then we also have Dungeons & Dragons Basic, the blue box, levels 1 through 3. So, bing! All right, first split. Okay, 1978, we have the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. In 1979, we have the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master Guide. Weird that the Monster Manual book came before the Player's Handbook, but whatever. I'm sure they had a reason. But in 1979, 1981, somewhere in between, around there, we also have the BX version of Dungeons & Dragons. We have the basic set, which is the magenta box, levels 1 through 3, and the expert set, which is the light blue box, levels 4 through 14. In 1983, we have Dungeons & Dragons, the BECMI version, basic sets, the infamous red box, the expert set, the infamous blue box, and the companion set, all around between 1981 and 1983. In around 1983, 1984, we also have the master set, which is the black box. 1985, we have Unearthed Arcana, and the Immortals set, which is the gold box. So, all right, so even more splits. So right now we're looking at, at the end of the 80s, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versions. I mean, the blue box is just more levels to the red box. So and they didn't really change things. Does Unearthed Arcana count as a new version of Dungeons & Dragons? No, it just counts as adding Splat to the existing. So by the end of 1985, we're looking at 5 versions. 1989, we have Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, 2nd edition. Player's Handbook, Dungeon Masters, and Monstrous Companion all came out between 1989 and 1991. But also around 1991, we have Dungeons & Dragons, the RC version, the basic set, black box level, and the Rules Cyclopedia, levels 1 through 36, which many people believe the Rules Cyclopedia that came out in 1991, 1992 is the best version of OG D&D. Of all the ones that came out between 1974 and 1993, many people believe that the Rules Cyclopedia levels 1 through 36, the RC version, is the best version of D&D. I don't have a copy of that. That's probably, that's one of those things like everybody who plays D&D should have, the Dungeon Master's Guide with the statue with the eye getting stolen and that one. But, I'm not buying any more games right now. Okay. So then 1993, we have a Monstrous Manual that comes out that replaces the Monstrous Companion for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But that doesn't really count as a 2nd edition. So we're looking at 6, 7, 8 versions of D&D. 1995, we have the revised Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. Plus, we have the Player's Options Dungeon Master series. That was the huge splat book series that came out. The brown books, some of them are really genius. Most of them are just splat. Then around 1995, we have Classics Dungeons & Dragons, the Tan book, which is the basic set, levels 1 through 5, and a reprint of the Rules Cyclopedia. So by 1995, the year 2000, we are now looking at 5, 6, 7, 8 versions of D&D. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 versions. 9 versions of D&D by 1995. 2000, D&D 3rd edition. Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual. 2003, D&D 3.5. Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual. So by 2003, 10, 11 versions. So currently at 11 versions of D&D in 2003. 2008, 4th edition, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual. So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 versions of Dungeons & Dragons by 2008. 2010, we have Dungeons & Dragons Essential, the Rules Companion. So that's another version. Then we have Heroes of the Fallen Land, Heroes of the Forgotten Kingdom, Dungeons Master's Kit, and Monster Vault. So we're looking at 15 versions right now. 2014, we have Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So we have the basic rules, D&D Now, the PDF so that's 16th edition. Then we have the D&D 5th edition starter set, that's 17 versions. We have the D&D core rulebooks, Player's Handbook, Dungeons Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. That's 18 versions. So we have 18 versions of Dungeons & Dragons right now. Then we have the Stranger's Thing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition box set. So that's 19 versions. We have the Critical Role Dungeons & Dragons starter set. That's 20 versions. We have the Expert box set of Dungeons & Dragons. So that was the expansion reprint of the first box set. It has the expansion to Minds of Paladins. So we're looking at now 21? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So we're at 19, 20. We have the Rick and Morty 5th edition box set. So that's 20. We'll say that's 20. We have the Adventurers books that came out. So we're 21. 21. Yeah, let's round up and say 22. I'm probably missing something. Plus we have Pathfinder. So 23. Before Pathfinder got all weird, you just start with the Pathfinder basic set, Pathfinder Dungeons & Dragons, Monster Manual, Pathfinder Dungeons & Master's Guide. It's basically the next evolution of Dungeons & Dragons, so it sort of counts, but it doesn't. So 23. 23 printed versions of Dungeons & Dragons in 5 editions. That's not count, and that's just in America. That's not counting British versions, which is slightly different, and or Japanese versions, or South American versions, or Greenland versions, or space versions, or just printed from the people who hold the rights to the word Dungeons & Dragons, not other games that took the Dungeons & Dragons rules and reprinted them using different things like Castles and Crusades. This is not canon to the OGL, which is, all sorts of new versions. Just from the official people, from Gygax and Company to today, 23 versions of Dungeons & Dragons. So hopefully that explains that even though there's 5 versions, there's 23 versions. Each one of those versions slightly different. Each one starts an argument over which is the best version, which is the version you prefer. This is my favorite version. It's the version I played. And then, of course, that leads us to the OGL, where people take these older versions and they cut and paste and they reprint them, with maybe slight differences and try and give it a modern feel. We have, like 5 Torches Deep, which takes 5th edition, and, basic D&D and sort of combines it together. We have, Swords and Wizardry. We have basic role-playing. We have all these other games that took the D&D and ran with it. So and each one saying, oh, this is based upon the BX version, or the RC Art version, or the Gygax version, or the 3.5 version, or the basic rules, or the expert rules. So that hopefully explains the confusion regarding why there's so many versions of Dungeons & Dragons. And with this new release of this Young Adventurers Guide, that takes us up to 24, 25. So 25. Ridiculous. Awesome? Ridiculous. It keeps... And, do we count playtest versions as other versions? Because the playtest version of 5th edition was way different than 5th edition. And the playtest version of 4th edition was way different than the final printed version of 4th edition. And some people use the playtest versions of 4th as the actual way 4th should be. So, you know what? That rounds us up to 30. That rounds us up to 30 if you count people who got playtest versions and count them as the playtest version was better than the actual printed version. The playtest version of 5th edition, D&D Next, was definitely way better than 5th. Thank you. I hope you appreciate this content. And if you do, comment down below and let me know. If you don't appreciate this content and want me to shut the fuck up, comment down below and let me know. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 500 subs by the end of the year. If I hit 500 subs by New Year's Eve, I'm going to do something crazy. It might involve a tattoo. Since it's the holidays, if you're feeling generous, please consider supporting me. And if you haven't voted, vote yet. And hopefully tomorrow, no matter who wins this most bizarre of all elections, we can still remain civil to each other. We have to get along. We have to live with each other going forward and try and take the disaster that America has become and make it a better place, because nobody else wants us. Talk to you later, losers.